crisis in Gaza. The United Nations held its first session on the conflict today. The Israeli ambassador to the UN made the Jewish state's case for the continued offensive against Hamas.
In the last 3 days, 442 rockets have been fired into Israel. That's one every 10 minutes. "15 seconds. That's how much time you have to run for your life. Imagine having only 15 seconds to find a bomb shelter. Now imagine doing it with small children or elderly parents or an ailing friend."
Well, Ambassador Prosor joins me now live from the United Nations. We saw you there with what I believe was an iPhone, where you had the sound of a siren to explain to people at the UN Security Council what it was like for ordinary Israeli civilians. What kind of response did you get? Because I understand you were using that sound effect with others within the halls of the UN today.
No, I used it in the Security Council, and I think it gave people a sense of what it means. You know, people outside the region, you know the region very well. There's a sense of not really understanding what really goes on day in and day out. I would say on both sides, but this was a good, I think, feeling that people had of what it means to run for shelter in such a short amount of time.
Let me ask you about the operation in Gaza. This is an operation that has, and the Israeli military has conducted many air raids, hundreds of targets, but also has killed civilians. We saw a house in Khan Yunis there with barely any kind of warning, and 7 civilians killed. Why is the Israeli military not being more careful in not killing civilians in this operation?
First, we're trying to do the utmost not to hit civilian casualties. I think the real question here is, if you look at it, the question is who puts their children in harm's way? Israeli parents put their children and run with them to shelters. Hamas are sending their children as human shields on the houses and different installations that they know are military installations. It's important for me to say that because I think I'm saying it genuinely in the name of many Israelis. Every casualty, an innocent casualty, is a tragedy. But the state of Israel is being subjected in the last days to indiscriminatory missile attacks against all our citizens, by the way, also Arab Israeli citizens. Day in and day out.
You're saying, I have to jump in on this case of this Khan Yunis house. This wasn't Hamas militants using children as human shields. This was barely giving any forward warning, and then a family leaving, realizing that the strike didn't happen, going back in their home, and 7 civilians, including children, dying. This isn't Palestinians putting their kids in harm's way intentionally. I mean, are you saying that?
No, what I'm saying is that the big difference is that the Israeli Defense Forces are making a real differentiation and a real effort, and you know that, in trying to really hit the infrastructure of Hamas that they have amassed to a size that I think even you did not imagine. Thousands of rockets. Look at what they've been doing. Instead of using cement and steel to build schools and kindergartens, they've been building all those terror tunnels, even a terror tunnel that they exploded in Kerem Shalom, which is the only place where we are passing, as we did in the last days, truckloads of food into Gaza. I mean, this organization, beyond treating everyone else in this abolishing way, it's also treating its citizens and don't care in the sense for the human beings. They just use this human shields on them, and this is the big difference.
Well, I think those who are inside of Gaza reporting from the ground on what's going on would very much disagree with you that those who are civilians who are killed in this operation somehow deserve it because Hamas uses human shields. These are still civilians.
I would put it this way. What would you do? You have when I headed the Israeli Foreign Service a couple of years back, we disengaged completely out of Gaza. I think you were there. It wasn't to look back and go into Gaza. We went out to the 67 lines, to the green lines. Israeli citizens cannot be subjected to missiles and terror day in and day out in cycles that every time Hamas uses some kind of a timeout to amass more weapons, more precision weapons, we have to make a stop to this, and this is not just Israel.
Right.
Look at the region. The region is, if you look at the region, ISIS and Hezbollah, you look at it from Abuja in Nigeria to Fallujah in Iraq. We all have to stand up very, very firmly against terror, because if we don't stand today, we will be subjected to terror all over the world tomorrow.
You're right when you say I was there when the Israelis disengaged from Gaza, and I've been there several times since. And the question isn't, is Israel occupying Gaza? This is what Palestinians are going to tell you, and you've heard this, and I will relay it again. They say, here we are in this open-air prison. We have no control of our borders. We have no freedom of movement. We are herded, 1.5 million of us in this territory, and we are being pounded militarily. How is this fair, this collective punishment? This is what Palestinians would say to you.
I know they say that, but I would say a very simple thing, which is usually not so simple in this region, but it's a simple equation. If it's going to be quiet in Israel, it's going to be quiet in Gaza. And you know that, and I think everyone else knows that. We are dealing with a terrorist organization that people tend not to basically articulate. It doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. It doesn't recognize previous agreements, and uses violence and terror. I haven't heard them change their mind. If you did, please phone me. I'm available 24 hours a day.
Ambassador, very quickly, one of the things you were quoted as saying, and I want to confirm this with you today, that you said, quote, we do not want a ceasefire. Is that correct? What is it that you do want?
I said very clearly that Israel wants to dismantle the military infrastructure of Hamas, because we cannot live in a situation where Israeli citizens are subjected day in and day out to this terror. So we will do everything in our power to put a stop to those waves of missiles flying into our cities, hitting innocent civilians, and we will do everything that it takes to put an end to that.
Ambassador Ron Prosor, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, joining us live from the UN. Thanks very much for your time this evening.
Thank you.
Earlier, we told you about a major new diplomatic